People always think cheating announces itself with distance, coldness, or sudden fights. Mine announced itself with kindness. My name is Daniel, I'm 24, and until last winter I was dating Emma, also 24. We'd been together for just over 4 years, long enough that the relationship didn't feel fragile, long enough that we'd already survived boring phases, stressful months, and the quiet understanding that comes from familiarity. That's why I didn't panic when December started feeling a little off. There was some distance between us at first. Fewer late-night talks, shorter replies, a vague sense that something was being carried elsewhere. I noticed it, but I didn't accuse her. Relationships drift sometimes. I told myself that closeness returns the same way it fades, slowly. Then, about a week before Christmas, everything changed. Not for the worse, for the better. Too much better. Suddenly, Emma was complimenting me constantly. Not casually, not playfully, intentionally. She told me I was patient, thoughtful, supportive. She thanked me for things she'd never acknowledged before, like listening, like remembering details, like being different from other guys. She started explaining her whereabouts without being asked. I was at Sarah's, but we didn't stay long. I grabbed coffee with coworkers, but nothing exciting. I stayed late at work, but I can tell you who was there. It was all voluntary, preemptive, defensive kindness. Her phone became an extension of her body, always face down, always locked, always angled slightly away from me, like it contained information she couldn't afford to let spill. I didn't confront her. I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I paid attention. That's the thing no one talks about. When something feels wrong, panic is optional. Observation isn't. A week later, I asked to borrow her laptop to print something. I didn't snoop. I didn't dig through folders or open old photos. She'd simply left her messages logged in. I didn't read everything, just enough. Enough to see another name. Enough to recognize the tone. Enough to see the same jokes, the same reassurances, the same promises she'd once used on me. I wasn't imagining things. There was someone else. And here's where people expect a different story. They expect anger, confrontation, screenshots, exposure, a public collapse designed to reclaim dignity through spectacle. I didn't do any of that. Instead, I became the best boyfriend she'd ever had. I cooked without being asked. I listened without interrupting. I remembered small details she mentioned once. I showed up early. I stayed calm during arguments. I validated her confusing feelings. I made her feel safe. Safe enough to stop hiding. That part mattered more than revenge ever could. I didn't rush her. I didn't pressure her. I didn't change my tone or my affection. I let her relax into the idea that nothing was wrong, that she was still loved, still trusted, still secure. And in that safety, the truth grew restless. 3 weeks later, she sat me down. She was crying before she even spoke. When Emma sat me down, I already knew what she was going to say. That didn't make it easier. It just made it quieter. But before that moment, there were 3 weeks that deserved to be understood, because those weeks explain everything that came after. Once I knew, I stopped guessing. There's a strange calm that comes when uncertainty disappears. Fear lives in not knowing. Certainty, no matter how painful, gives you structure. And with structure, you can move deliberately instead of emotionally. Emma noticed the change almost immediately. "You've been really present lately," she said one night, smiling at me across the table. "I've always been present." Which was true. I was just intentional now. I paid attention to how she reacted to kindness, how she leaned into it but never quite relaxed. Guilt does that. It keeps people alert even when they're being comforted. She started opening up more. Not about the affair, about everything around it. She talked about feeling confused, about being overwhelmed by attention, about how nice it felt to feel wanted without responsibility attached. She never used names. She didn't need to. I knew who she meant every time. I didn't correct her. I nodded, asked questions, listened. That surprised her. People expect anger when they confess feelings that cross lines. My calm gave her room, and room is dangerous when someone is hiding something heavy. She stopped guarding her phone as tightly, left it on the table more often, took calls in the same room, not because she was honest, because she thought she was safe. That's when I understood something important. She wasn't cheating because she hated me. She was cheating because she didn't think she'd lose me. There's a difference. She believed I was stable enough to absorb the damage, that I'd bend, that I'd forgive, that love meant endurance. So I let her believe that. I became consistent, reliable, unreactive. I didn't ask where she'd been anymore, didn't question timelines, didn't push for reassurance. I gave her what she thought she wanted, emotional security without interrogation. That security started working on her. She'd look at me longer, hold my hand tighter, cry more easily. Guilt needs contrast to surface, and I gave her plenty of it. One night, she said something that almost broke my composure. "You make me feel safe," she whispered, half asleep. "I don't deserve you." I didn't respond, because in that moment, I realized something final had already happened. I didn't love her the same way anymore. I cared, I was kind, I was patient, but love, the kind that blinds you, that excuses things before they're spoken, had already started leaving, quietly. And I knew how this would end. Not with me confronting her, but with her confessing. Because guilt doesn't disappear when it's coddled, it multiplies, and eventually it demands to be seen. I just had to wait long enough for her to choose the moment herself. The longer I stayed calm, the more Emma unraveled. Not visibly, not in a dramatic way. It showed up in small cracks, missed sentences, half-finished thoughts, emotions that didn't match the moment. Guilt doesn't scream, it leaks. She started over-explaining again, but differently now. Less defensive, more confessional. "I don't know why I feel like this," she said one evening, sitting cross-legged on the couch. "I feel split, like I'm not fully here or there." I let the silence sit. When people talk into silence, they reveal more than they intend to. She talked about identity, about growing up, about how 4 years suddenly felt like forever in a way that scared her. She framed everything as confusion, as if the affair were an emotional fog she'd wandered into rather than a path she'd chosen repeatedly. I didn't correct her language. Correction would have given her something to push against. I wanted her to keep talking. She began crying more often, not the sharp, panicked crying from before, but slow, exhausted crying, the kind that comes when someone is tired of holding two realities apart. I held her when she cried. That's the part people struggle to understand when I tell this story. I didn't hold her because I was hoping to save the relationship. I held her because I wanted to see her clearly, without anger, without denial, without performance. And what I saw was someone who'd been rehearsing a role for weeks and was finally running out of energy. At the same time, she leaned into me harder. She praised me constantly now, told me how patient I was, how different I was from other men, how she didn't know how she'd gotten so lucky. Each compliment felt like a transaction. She was trying to rebalance the scales without naming what had tipped them. One night, she said something that stayed with me. "I don't want to lose what we have," she said softly. "I think I'd fall apart." She didn't say she didn't want to hurt me. She said she didn't want to lose stability. That distinction mattered. I started noticing how often she centered her feelings, even when apologizing. "I feel terrible. I feel ashamed. I feel scared." Never, "I hurt you." Never, "I lied." Her emotions were still the main event. That's when I understood something I hadn't before. Her confession, when it came, wouldn't be about honesty. It would be about relief. And I was right. A few days later, she asked if we could talk seriously. She was already crying when she said it. "I can't carry this anymore," she said. "I need to tell you something." I nodded. "I've been seeing someone else," she said quickly, like speed might soften the impact. "It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was stupid and confusing, and I hate myself for it." She looked at me like she was bracing for a storm. I stayed still. She talked for 10 minutes straight. Apologies, justifications, self-blame wrapped in emotional language. She said she wanted to do the work, said she was ready to rebuild trust, said she'd cut contact immediately, said she couldn't imagine her life without me. When she finally stopped talking, she looked exhausted. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You deserve better." I nodded again. "I know," I said. That was the moment something shifted. She expected anger, tears, questions, anything that would center me as wounded and her as repentant. Instead, she saw calm, and calm scared her more than rage ever could, because calm meant I wasn't reacting, I was deciding. After she confessed, there was a strange pause in the room. Not silence, breathing. The sound of two people realizing they were no longer standing in the same story. Emma was waiting for something from me, a question, a demand, a promise, a reaction she could shape herself around. I didn't give her any of that. I let the moment sit. She started filling the space instinctively, like she always did when she felt exposed. "I ended it," she said quickly. "I blocked him. I swear. I want us to be okay." I nodded, slowly, deliberately. "I'm glad you told me," I said. Her shoulders dropped with relief. She reached for my hand, and for a second I let her hold it, not because I needed comfort, but because I wanted to see what she thought that gesture meant now. She mistook my stillness for hope. "I know I don't deserve another chance," she continued, tears spilling again, "but I'm ready to do anything. Therapy, transparency, whatever you need." There it was, the bargaining phase. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the version of me she thought still existed, the one who believed love meant endurance, who would trade self-respect for stability if presented with enough remorse. I waited until she finished. Then I said it. "I need to tell you something too." She looked up immediately, eyes wide, searching my face for clues. "I've known for almost a month." The words didn't land at first. She blinked. Once. Twice. "What?" she whispered. "I found out weeks ago," I repeated calmly. "I didn't confront you. I just paid attention." Her face changed in a way I'll never forget. Not anger. Not fear. Shock. Pure, disorienting shock, like the ground had shifted under her without warning. You knew?" she asked, voice barely audible. "Then why didn't you say anything?" I met her eyes. "Because I wanted to be absolutely sure this wasn't a mistake," I said, "before I stopped loving you." The room felt heavy after that. She pulled her hand away slowly, like she'd just touched something dangerous. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked at me the way someone looks at a mirror that suddenly doesn't reflect them back. "You were pretending?" she said, finally. "No," I replied. "I was observing." She started crying harder then, but it was different from before. Not guilt, not shame, loss of control. "You let me confess?" she said. "You let me break down in front of you?" "Yes. Why would you do that?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't have one, but because the answer mattered. "Because I wanted to be absolutely sure this wasn't a mistake," I said, before I stopped loving you. She shook her head, sobbing now. That's cruel, she said. I stayed calm. No, cruel would have been exposing you, or humiliating you, or screaming. I didn't do any of that. I stood up and walked to the bedroom. I packed quietly. No rushing, no slamming drawers. Just the things that were mine. Clothes, laptop, a book I'd been reading. She followed me, panicked. Please don't leave like this, she begged. We can fix this. We can talk more. We already did, I said, zipping the bag. You said you loved me, she cried. I did, I replied, longer than you deserved. I walked out that night, blocked her the next morning. No speeches, no ultimatums, no second chances. Because the moment I knew she could look me in the eyes for weeks while lying, and everyone else already knew, I understood something final. Love doesn't die in an argument. It dies in observation. And once it's gone, there's nothing left to negotiate. The first night after I left, I didn't feel relief. I felt empty, not hollow in a dramatic way, more like the absence of constant noise. My phone didn't light up, no late-night explanations, no emotional negotiations disguised as conversations, just quiet. That's when the aftershock started. Emma tried to reach me immediately, of course. Calls from unknown numbers, emails I didn't open, messages sent through mutual friends that began with, "She's not okay," and ended with, "She just wants to talk." That phrase again, just wants to talk. I noticed how no one said, "She wants to take responsibility," or "She wants to understand what she did to you." It was always framed as her emotional emergency. I stayed with a friend for a few days. A couch, a blanket, coffee in the morning. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "You did the right thing," once, casually, like it wasn't something that needed debate. That helped more than advice ever could. The next few days felt unreal. My body was still operating on the habits of a relationship that no longer existed. I'd reach for my phone instinctively, think about sending a message, then remember there was nothing left to explain. What surprised me most was how quickly my mind started organizing what had happened, not replaying it obsessively, not romanticizing it, just filing it correctly. I realized how much energy I'd spent managing her emotions over the years, how often I'd softened my reactions to avoid upsetting her, how quickly I'd apologized for things that weren't actually wrong. That pattern didn't start with the cheating. The cheating just exposed it. Friends started reaching out once word spread that I'd moved out. Some were supportive, others were curious in that uncomfortable way people get when they want details but don't want responsibility. A couple of people admitted they'd suspected something was off. That stung, but it also confirmed something important. My instincts had been right long before my certainty caught up. Emma sent one last message through a mutual friend a week later. "Tell him I understand now. Tell him I see how messed up this was. Tell him I'll wait." That part made me pause, not because it tempted me, but because it showed she still didn't get it. Waiting assumes there's a door left open. There wasn't. I didn't respond. I didn't send a message back explaining my silence. Silence didn't need justification anymore. That week, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. Not because I'd won, not because she'd lost, but because I wasn't holding two realities at once anymore. No more pretending everything was fine while knowing it wasn't. No more performing stability so someone else could feel secure while I doubted myself. I went for long walks, cooked simple meals, slept deeply for the first time in months. My thoughts slowed down enough that I could actually hear them. And one thought kept returning, steady and clear. I didn't leave because she cheated. I left because once I saw who she became when she thought I wouldn't leave, I couldn't unsee it. That version of her would always exist now. And loving someone doesn't mean staying with the version of them you can no longer respect. I wasn't angry. I was done. And being done felt strangely peaceful. About 2 weeks after I left, the narrative around what happened started to change. Not in my head, in everyone else's. That's something no one prepares you for, the way a breakup keeps evolving even after you've already made peace with it. Stories don't stay still. They get adjusted, softened, rewritten to make the people telling them more comfortable. I heard about it through friends. She's really struggling. She feels like you blindsided her. She didn't realize how serious it was until you walked out. Blindsided. That word bothered me more than it should have. Not because it was unfair, but because it revealed how she was choosing to remember things. In her version, the timeline started at my exit, not at her betrayal. The pain began when she lost something, not when she lied. I didn't correct anyone. I'd already learned that correcting narratives is exhausting and mostly pointless. People believe what fits their emotional needs. Truth is secondary. Emma eventually sent me a long email. I didn't read it all at once. I skimmed it, put it away, came back later. There was no urgency anymore. She wrote about growth, about how my calm reaction had forced her to reflect, about how she was finally understanding her patterns, her fears, her self-sabotage. She apologized again, but the apology was layered with explanation, like she couldn't quite let responsibility stand on its own. The line that stood out most was this: "I think if you'd confronted me earlier, things might have been different." I closed the laptop after that. Not angry, just certain. That sentence carried everything I needed to know. She wasn't sorry I'd been hurt. She was sorry she'd lost control of the timing. If I'd confronted her earlier, she might have denied it, or minimized it, or reshaped it into something forgivable before it fully formed. My patience had taken that option away, and that was something she still hadn't forgiven me for. I noticed something else during that time. I wasn't lonely. That surprised me more than anything else. I missed routines sometimes, familiar gestures, shared jokes, but I didn't miss her presence. The absence felt clean, uncomplicated, like taking off a jacket that had been too tight for too long. I spent more time with friends, reconnected with people I hadn't seen in years. Conversations felt lighter, not because they avoided depth, but because they didn't require constant emotional maintenance. No one needed me to manage their guilt. One evening, sitting alone in my friend's living room, I thought about the version of myself from a month earlier, the one who was still smiling, still trying, still convincing himself that kindness alone could protect a relationship. I didn't feel embarrassed for him. I felt proud. He'd trusted. He'd paid attention. And when the truth arrived, he didn't collapse or lash out. He adjusted. That mattered. Emma tried one last time a few days later. A voicemail. Calm. Controlled. Carefully worded. "I'm not asking you to come back," she said. "I just want you to know I never stopped loving you." I listened to it once, then deleted it. Not because it was cruel, but because it was irrelevant. Love that survives only when it's convenient isn't love. It's dependency with good marketing. I realized then that I wasn't waiting for closure anymore. I already had it. It came the moment I understood that her regret wasn't about me. It was about losing the version of herself who thought she could have everything without consequences. And I wasn't interested in being part of that version's recovery arc. Some endings don't need to be explained. They need to be respected. By the third week, something subtle but important happened. I stopped thinking about her first thing in the morning. It wasn't a dramatic shift, no clear line where I woke up and felt healed. It was more like noticing halfway through my coffee, that I hadn't replayed any conversations yet, that my mind had gone somewhere else first. Work, plans, the day ahead. That's when I knew I'd crossed a quiet threshold. People talk about heartbreak like it's loud and cinematic, crying in the shower, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. I had moments like that, sure, but what defined this phase wasn't pain, it was return. I was coming back to myself. I started doing things without explaining them to anyone, going for a run just because I felt like it, saying no without offering a justification, making plans and not worrying how they'd be received. That kind of freedom sneaks up on you. Friends noticed the change before I did. "You seem grounded," someone said. "Different, in a good way," said another. I didn't correct them. I didn't analyze it out loud. I just let it be true. Emma faded into the background of my life the way old habits do, not erased, but no longer active. I'd hear updates occasionally, secondhand. She was working on herself. She was taking accountability. She was learning from the experience. I wished her well, genuinely, but I no longer felt connected to the outcome. That detachment was new territory for me. I'd always been the kind of person who stayed emotionally invested long after things ended, who tried to understand every angle, every motive. This time, understanding felt unnecessary. I understood enough. One night, lying in bed, I thought about the moment she'd looked at me in shock when I told her I'd known for weeks. That expression, confusion mixed with disbelief, had stayed with me. At the time, I'd thought it was because she felt exposed. Now I realized it was because she'd lost the narrative. She'd expected to control the story, the confession, the redemption, the forgiveness arc. My silence had taken that power away. And I didn't feel guilty about that anymore. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I'd learned something important. Protecting your peace doesn't require permission from the person who disrupted it. I went on a date around that time. Nothing serious. Coffee, conversation, no expectations. It felt strange in a good way. Light, unburdened. I didn't compare. I didn't measure. I just existed. And I noticed something else. I wasn't guarded. That surprised me. I hadn't hardened. I hadn't shut down. I was still open, just clearer about where my boundaries lived. That felt like growth. I thought back to the version of myself who'd stayed calm while knowing the truth, who'd chosen patience over confrontation, observation over reaction. He hadn't been weak. He'd been precise, and that precision had carried me out intact. Some people need chaos to end things. I needed clarity. And now that I had it, I didn't feel like I'd lost anything essential. I felt like I'd gotten myself back. By the time a full month had passed, the story had settled into something quieter. Not forgotten, just placed. I no longer checked my phone expecting anything from Emma. Her name didn't trigger a reaction anymore, no spike of anger, no ache of nostalgia. It was just information, a chapter I'd closed without ceremony. What surprised me most was what stayed after everything else fell away. My values stayed. I didn't become colder. I didn't become suspicious of everyone. I didn't turn bitterness into a personality trait. I stayed kind, just not indiscriminate. I stayed open, just not careless. That mattered to me. I thought a lot about the 3 weeks where I'd known the truth and chosen patience. People online love to argue about whether that was manipulation or maturity. I don't care about the label. I know why I did it. I needed to be sure. Not sure she was cheating. I already knew that. Sure that leaving wasn't an emotional reaction. Sure that I wasn't acting out of pride or humiliation or fear of looking weak. Those weeks gave me certainty. And certainty is something you can build a future on. I noticed how differently I handled conflict afterward. at work, with friends, even with strangers. I didn't rush to fill silence anymore. I didn't overexplain. I let people reveal themselves at their own pace. That skill, waiting without disengaging, was something I'd earned the hard way. Occasionally, someone would ask about Emma directly. "Do you ever miss her? Would you ever talk to her again?" I answered honestly. "I miss who I thought she was," I'd say, "but I don't miss the relationship." That usually ended the conversation. Because people don't always want truth. They want reconciliation stories, redemption arcs, proof that love conquers everything if you try hard enough. But some lessons aren't about conquering. They're about recognizing. Recognizing when love becomes self-abandonment. Recognizing when patience turns into permission. Recognizing when kindness is being mistaken for permanence. I didn't regret how I handled things. I didn't regret staying calm. I didn't regret not exposing her. I didn't regret leaving quietly. What I regretted, if anything, was not trusting my instincts sooner. But even that regret softened with time, because instincts grow stronger when they're tested, and mine had passed. I didn't know exactly what came next. I wasn't in a rush to define it. For the first time in years, my life felt like it belonged to me again, not a shared project requiring constant negotiation. I slept well. I laughed easily. I planned without checking in. That was enough. And it told me something important. The story wasn't ending. It was clearing space. There's a moment, weeks after everything ends, when you realize you're no longer recovering. You're just living. It hit me on an ordinary morning. I woke up without that familiar heaviness in my chest, without the instinct to replay timelines or analyze expressions. My thoughts weren't organized around loss anymore. They were organized around the day. That's when I understood the story was finished. Not because it stopped mattering, but because it stopped asking something from me. I thought a lot about how quietly it all ended. No public fallout, no dramatic reveals, no long messages explaining my side. Just a clean exit that confused people who expected noise. At first, I wondered if that meant I'd missed something, some final act that would validate the pain. Then I realized something simpler. I didn't need to prove I was hurt. I needed to prove to myself that I wouldn't abandon my own clarity just to preserve someone else's comfort. Looking back, I don't frame what happened as betrayal anymore. That word feels too dramatic, too final. What really ended things wasn't the cheating. It was the moment I understood that she could look at me with affection while carrying a truth that made me the only uninformed person in my own relationship. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. I don't even feel the need for closure beyond what I already gave myself. I hope she learns something real from it. Not the performative kind of growth people post about, but the quiet kind that changes how they treat the next person who trusts them. As for me, I kept what mattered. I kept my ability to love without suspicion. I kept my patience without turning it into tolerance. I kept my kindness without confusing it for weakness. I didn't walk away angry. I walked away aligned. And that's the part people don't talk about enough, how powerful it is to leave before bitterness rewrites who you are. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, it's this. Pay attention to patterns, not promises. Trust consistency more than reassurance, and never mistake silence for peace. Sometimes the strongest move isn't confrontation, it's observation. And sometimes the most final ending is the one where you don't need to say anything at all. You just leave, and you don't look back. Write a comment about what you would do in my situation.